Under the golden glow of sunset by Silverpine Lake, blind girl Aria gently holds the leash, walking beside Kael, a German Shepherd with a warm amber coat, his ears always tuned to the sounds of the world. To Aria, Kael is not only her guiding eyes, but the silent friend who guards every breath of her peace. Yet on that seemingly tranquil afternoon, a shadowed figure appears carrying an undercurrent that could sweep everything away. What will happen when Aria's safety is threatened and Kael must face the greatest challenge of his life? Autumn mornings in Silverpine began with a light as soft as silk spilling across the still surface of the lake and over the dew-soaked grass along its banks. Silverpine Lake was beautiful year-round, but in the fall, a veil of mist thin as smoke hovered gently above the water, catching the fiery orange gold of the maples lining the shore. From somewhere in the distance came the steady rhythm of oars dipping into water, blending with the chatter of sparrows in the branches, an unhurried melody only those who lingered long enough could truly hear. The narrow trail circling the lake was carpeted in dry leaves, each step releasing a crisp, delicate crunch. The scent of damp wood and wild grass still holding the morning dew mingled with the faint smell of freshly turned soil from the gardens on the edge of town. For the people of Silverpine, this place was more than the heart of their community. It was a living memory of generations, the site of autumn fairs, the place where children learned to ride their bikes, and where countless everyday stories quietly began. Along that trail, a small girl walked slowly, her left hand wrapped firmly around a leash, her right brushing gently along the warm body of the German Shepherd at her side. This was 7-year-old Aria Collins, her deep brown eyes never having known the gift of sight since the day she was born. In Silverpine, everyone knew Aria, the little girl whose smile shone like sunlight and whose steady steps were made possible by a very special companion. Beside her walked Kael, a German Shepherd, with a lustrous amber-gold coat streaked with rich sable along his back and ears. His stride was strong and measured his tail swaying slightly in rhythm. With ears pricked and sharp brown eyes sweeping the surroundings, Kael seemed to read every subtle movement in the world around them, ensuring the safety of the girl he guarded. Kael was no ordinary guide dog. Before coming to Aria, he had served as a rescue dog in the Northern Mountain Search and Rescue Unit. Long, unforgiving winters had honed his uncanny sense of direction and lightning-quick responses to danger. But what Elaine, Aria's mother, often told the neighbors was this: he has a heart that listens. That morning, Aria and Kael were starting a new walking route. Elaine stood at a rendezvous point a few hundred meters away, watching from a distance, letting her daughter navigate the lakeside path on her own. Aria tilted her head, listening to the whisper of maple leaves falling, feeling the cool breeze thread through her hair. The lake's fresh scent mixed with the faint perfume of wildflowers by the bank, painting a vivid landscape in her mind's eye. Kael guided her with seamless precision, angling them gently around bends, slowing when an obstacle lay ahead, giving her time to adjust her pace. Beneath their feet, the gravel and leaf path crackled softly, a quiet applause for their small journey. When they reached a small wooden pier, Aria paused. The gentle slap of water beneath the boards and the earthy tang of damp planks told her she was close to the lake's edge. She crouched, slightly resting her free hand on Kael's head. "We're at the dock, aren't we, Kael?" she murmured, her voice soft as the breeze. Kael looked up at her, his eyes catching the lake's shimmer. He pressed his shoulder lightly against her leg, a silent confirmation. In that moment, Aria imagined the wide expanse of water before her, the boats bobbing lazily, the maples letting their leaves drift down to kiss the surface. Peace spread through her chest, and the hand resting on Kael's head grew warmer. They moved on the sound of the town's church bells drifting across the lake, marking the passing of another hour. Kael quickened his pace, leading her through a narrow stretch shaded by drooping willows, their trailing leaves brushing her shoulder with a silken touch. Near the end of the path, Elaine appeared ahead, smiling as she watched her daughter and Kael approach. Aria recognized her mother's step by the faint rustle of grass under her shoes and the familiar lavender scent from the scarf around her neck. Kael halted, stretching his neck toward Elaine, ears tilting in greeting. Elaine knelt, wrapping her arms around them both. "How was today's practice?" she asked, pride warming her voice. Aria smiled her hand, finding the thick fur at Kael's neck. "We made it all the way around the lake." Kael remembered every turn. The late morning sunlight filtered through the leaves, scattering golden flecks across the lake's surface. Elaine took her daughter's hand, Kael matching their steps as the three of them headed toward the town center. Life in Silverpine moved at a gentle pace, its streets paved in weathered gray stone lined with wooden storefronts whose signs had faded with time. The smell of freshly roasted coffee from Maeve's Cafe drifted down Main Street, mingling with the warm sweetness of waffles, tempting every passerby. Aria and Elaine's home was a small two-story wooden house with a sloping roof and windows facing the lake. Each morning, Elaine would open the windows to let the cool air sweep in, carrying with it the sound of waves and birdsong. At the breakfast table, Aria sat beside Kael, her hand instinctively finding the soft fur at the base of his neck, while Elaine prepared their meal. Their neighbor, Mr. Rowan, lived just next door. A tall, slender man in his 70s with a head of white hair and a deep green wool sweater. Once a boat builder, he had spent his life tied to Silverpine Lake, and every story he told carried the scent of pine and the salt-tinged memory of water. Each morning he stopped by with a gift, an apple from his back garden or a few butter cookies baked by his own hands. "Good morning, Princess of Silverpine," he greeted warmly, setting a small paper bag on the table. Aria accepted it with a smile. "Thank you, Mr. Rowan. Today, Kael and I are going through Main Street to the library." Kael, as if following the conversation, lifted his head toward Mr. Rowan and sniffed at his hand. The old man chuckled, stroking the shepherd's head with quiet fondness. Breakfast over, Aria began getting ready to go out. Elaine adjusted the thin scarf around her daughter's neck and gathered her hair so it wouldn't catch on her collar. Kael stood neatly beside her, the leash secured to his sturdy collar. This morning's trip to the library was part of a new route training plan that Kael and Aria had been practicing together. Main Street was quiet in the morning, though the hum of bicycle wheels from school children and the soft chatter of shopkeepers blended into the familiar background of the town. Kael guided Aria along the sidewalk, keeping a safe distance from the curb. Nearing a corner, he suddenly stopped, ears pricking forward. A small delivery truck was backing out of a parking lot, its rear wheels just a few paces from the spot where Aria was about to step down. In one smooth motion, Kael shifted to the left, gently blocking Aria with his body and pulling her back, just in time for the truck to roll fully into the street. Walking a few steps behind Elaine had seen everything. Her hand instinctively tightened. "Good work, Kael," she murmured the words, a quiet, heartfelt thanks. The town library stood inside an old building with tall glass-paned windows. The scent of aged paper and polished wood greeted Aria the moment she stepped in. She couldn't see the towering shelves that reached the ceiling, but she knew each aisle, each corner where the Braille books she loved were kept. Kael settled beside the reading table, watchful eyes following everyone who came and went, occasionally lifting his head at the sound of footsteps approaching Aria. After borrowing books, the three, Aria, Elaine, and Kael, took the long way home along the pine forest path. It was Aria's favorite stretch, where the whisper of pine needles above and the faint resin scent made her feel as though she were walking through a vast, living forest. Kael's steps were steady over the cushion of fallen needles, each pace measured to keep Aria's rhythm even. Elaine still remembered the day Kael first came to their family. A trainer had walked him up the front path, his amber gold coat glowing under the late afternoon sun. The trainer spoke of his past. Kael had once served in a northern mountain rescue team. During a brutal avalanche, he had led his team to 2 people buried deep beneath the snow. The rescue lasted nearly 10 hours in skin-biting cold, and Kael had been the eyes and ears of the team when visibility vanished completely. Elaine had never told Aria all the details, only that Kael was a hero who keeps his secrets. But sometimes, by the fireplace, her hand would find the faint scar on Kael's leg, a mark left by a falling block of ice during that mission. And she would silently thank fate for bringing him into her daughter's life. By late afternoon, Silverpine wore a warmer light. Aria sat on the porch, Kael lying beside her, his head resting across her lap. Mr. Rowan came by with a pot of herbal tea, and the three of them talked about the upcoming autumn fair, the sweet stalls, the outdoor concert. Kael would lift his head at the sound of Aria's laughter, his eyes reflecting a mixture of tenderness and alertness. He had grown accustomed to those sounds, treating them as proof that Aria's world was safe and filled with joy. As darkness fell, the pale yellow glow of street lamps lit the road. Elaine led Aria inside Kael, following with a calm, steady gait. Today, like so many others in Silverpine, had passed gently, leaving behind another layer of quiet memory. Yet somewhere beyond the edges of town, unexpected events were drawing closer, preparing to test the family in ways they had never imagined. Autumn afternoons in Silverpine carried a different kind of life from the mornings. The sun dipped lower, its light warmer, softer, spilling through golden leaves and casting long ribbons of light across the grass like the slow current of time. The Central Park, the town's beating heart, filled with families, groups of friends and children, enjoying the most beautiful hours of the day. Laughter drifted from the playground where swings glided back and forth under the steady push of parents' hands. Children's shadows danced across the grass, chasing each other's voices. Further off, a street band played gentle tunes on violin and guitar, their music mingling with the scent of popcorn and baked pastries from vendor carts along the walkway, creating an atmosphere both lively and deeply familiar. Aria entered the park with Kael and Elaine, her small hand gripping the leash, her other hand brushing the thick fur at the base of Kael's neck. Today was a special practice session. Kael would lead her along a new, longer route with more turns and obstacles to build her confidence in busy places. They started from the park's east gate, where the sounds of footsteps, laughter, and music blended into a vivid tapestry of sound. Kael moved slowly and steadily, ears upright, eyes scanning swiftly from side to side. Aria smiled at the crunch of dry leaves underfoot, the rhythmic clapping in time with music from an open courtyard nearby. As they approached the food court area, Kael eased his pace. To the right, a line of people waited at an ice cream stand. To the left, a couple maneuvered an awkward tandem bicycle. Kael guided Aria along the far edge, slipping them through without touching anyone. Elaine followed close behind, taking mental note of every subtle adjustment. The old maples along the path let golden leaves drift lazily to the ground. Aria inhaled deeply. The earthy scent of fallen leaves mingled with the sweet aroma of pastries. The sound of running water from the park's central fountain grew clearer, a sign they were on the right track. Kael steered them neatly around a group of teenagers playing volleyball, avoiding stray balls that might roll into their path. Near the central square where wide stone steps led up to the open-air stage, Aria became aware of footsteps approaching fast from ahead. The gait was heavier, quicker, different from the relaxed strolling all around them. Kael stopped, body lowering slightly, gaze fixed ahead. From between two rows of benches, a man emerged. He wore the deep blue jacket of the local police force, a cap pulled low to shadow half his face. Broad-shouldered and tall, he scanned the crowd with quick, uneasy eyes, as if searching or watching for something. Elaine recognized him immediately. Carter, the police officer she had seen a few times during patrols around the neighborhood. On most days, Carter carried himself with quiet composure. But today, from his stride to the look in his eyes, there was an edge of tension he couldn't conceal. Carter's gaze caught on Aria and Kael, lingering a fraction longer than it should have. Kael, sensing the unfamiliar current in the air, angled his body slightly forward, placing himself directly in front of Aria. His tail no longer swayed in its usual calm rhythm. Instead, his stance grew taut, ears, rigid eyes locked ahead. Aria tilted her head, picking up the change in Kael's guiding pace. "What is it, Kael?" she whispered, her hand tightening on the leash. Kael made no sound, only shifted subtly to draw Aria closer to Elaine. Carter slowed as he approached, as though weighing something in his mind. His eyes swept over Kael, paused for a heartbeat, then moved to Elaine. "Hello?" His voice was low, slightly uneven, as if distracted. "Out for training today?" Elaine nodded, her tone even. "Yes, Kael's taking Aria on a new route." The moment lasted only seconds, but the air between them felt like a thin wire pulled tight. Carter gave a brief nod, then walked on. Faster now, as if eager to end the encounter. Elaine watched his figure disappear into the crowd, a flicker of unease forming in her chest. Kael stayed still, eyes fixed in the direction Carter had gone, before finally leading Aria onward. By the time their session ended, the sun was dipping low, casting warm amber light over the rows of trees in the park. Aria sensed Kael's heightened focus, every guiding movement exact, as though he was guarding her from something she could not yet name. As the three left the park, the music and laughter trailed behind them. But in Elaine's mind, Carter's averted gaze and tense posture replayed again and again. She could not have known that this seemingly brief encounter was the first thread in a chain of events that would unravel their quiet days entirely. Late afternoon's light thinned, leaving the park bathed in a soft golden haze like honey. Music from the open-air stage still drifted, mingling with the shouts of young friends and the bright chatter of families. Children kept running across the grass, despite the cool breeze rolling in from the lake. Carter stood at the edge of a brick-paved path, a phone pressed to his ear. His voice was low and urgent. "I've got the update. Location: Central Park. Target: an amber-coated German Shepherd with a blind girl." The voice on the other end rattled off a rapid stream of instructions. Carter replied tersely, "Understood. I'll handle it now." He pocketed the phone, his eyes sweeping quickly across the crowd until they stopped on a distant figure. Aria, in her cream-knit coat, walking slowly beside Kael. The shepherd guided her calmly past a balloon vendor, his ears flicking at the sound of children's laughter nearby. Elaine followed several paces back, carrying a bag of fresh groceries. Carter drew a deep breath, his hand settling on the grip of his taser. He cut through a group of tourists moving quickly toward them. In that moment, it was as if a veil fell over his vision. He saw not a gentle guide dog, but a threat to be neutralized on command. The sharp crackle of electricity split the air, slicing through the park's cheerful noise. Before Aria could register what was happening, Kael jolted violently, his body seized in convulsions. A dull, heavy sound followed as his large frame collapsed onto the brick path. The leash slipped from Aria's hand, leaving an empty, icy space where his presence had been. Aria's cry broke trembling through the air. She dropped to her knees, hands searching frantically for the warm body that had been beside her moments before. Instead, her fingers found trembling muscle and labored breaths. Around them, the crowd rippled with shock. Some screamed, others pressed forward in confusion. Chairs clattered to the ground, food trays spilled, children's cries pierced the music which faltered into silence. Elaine heard her daughter's voice and was at her side in seconds, shoving past people without apology. The sight of Kael lying still, breath-ragged and eyes half open, made her chest tighten painfully. Aria stepped back. Elaine's voice shook as she knelt to check him, her hands trembling at the feel of his fur still hot from life. Beneath the skin, his heartbeat pounded fast and erratic. Carter stood a few meters away, faint wisps of smoke rising from the taser's muzzle. His eyes flicked over Elaine and Aria before scanning the crowd. A few people had recognized the weapon, and whispers began to spread. Why would he shoot the dog? It wasn't doing anything. I saw it. It was just guiding the little girl. Elaine lifted her head, anger and disbelief burning in her gaze. What have you done? Kael is a guide dog. Carter opened his mouth, but before he could speak, a strong gust swept in from the lake, carrying the distant wail of approaching sirens. Aria stayed crouched beside Kael, her small arms wrapped around his neck as if willing her warmth into him. Her voice quivered. Mom, Kael's going to be okay, right? Elaine swallowed hard, forcing steadiness into her reply. I'll take care of him. Just stay close to me. The crowd thickened. Some began recording with their phones, others shouted for a veterinary ambulance. In the middle of the chaos, Kael's eyes flickered open, a fraction wider, as if to confirm Aria was still there, before his lids drooped again, breath shallow. Carter stepped back, his face still tense but now edged with uncertainty. He seemed to be waiting, for someone or for another signal. But before he could act, Elaine bent, hooking her arms beneath Kael's chest. Her voice rang out for help as she tried to push through the circle of people. A broad-shouldered man from the park rushed forward to lift Kael's hindquarters. Nearest vet's on Westwood Street. We have to move now, he barked over the noise. Elaine nodded sharply, scanning for her daughter. Aria was right beside her, one hand gripping her mother's coat, the other still clutching the leash, as if letting go would mean losing Kael forever. As they rushed toward the park's gate, voices of confusion and protest still rippled behind them. Carter stood motionless for a moment, eyes tracking their departure, then slipped into a side path and vanished from sight. He left behind a park that moments earlier had been alive with laughter, now fractured into chaos and uncertainty. Somewhere else, the ones truly pulling the strings behind this incident were fitting the pieces of their plan together, waiting for the next opportunity to strike. The veterinary clinic on Westwood Street was smaller than Elaine expected. Just a weathered two-story building, its wooden sign bleached and worn by years of rain. Inside, though, the lights were bright, the air thick with the mingled scents of disinfectant and soap. As Elaine and the man who had helped her carried Kael through the door, it swung wide to reveal a young veterinarian in a blue coat hurrying toward them. Put him on the table now. The vet's voice rang with sharp urgency. Kael was lowered onto the examination table, his amber fur damp with sweat and clumped together. Aria stood close still, clutching the leash, her unseeing eyes turned toward the sound of Kael's labored breathing. Elaine bent to embrace her daughter, whispering, Kael's going to be looked after right away, sweetheart. The vet quickly attached electrodes, his brow knitting tightly. On the monitor, the green lines spiked and dipped erratically, sometimes in a rapid rush, other times slowing almost to a stall. Severe arrhythmia, he said to Elaine, his voice tight. I can give him a temporary stabilizing injection, but he needs Cardivant immediately. We don't have it here. It's only stocked at the military veterinary hospital in Fort Albron, about 300 kilometers away. The distance hit Elaine like a weight in her chest. She lifted her head. Can we leave right now? The vet shook his head, glancing toward the window where rain had begun to patter. A major storm is sweeping in from the southwest. Several road sections are already closed due to landslide risk. Driving now would be dangerous, and there's no guarantee the roads will be open. Thunder rumbled overhead, underlining the deadlock. Elaine squeezed Aria's hand. The girl could not see the rain hammering the glass, but she heard the wind starting to whistle through the window frame, carrying the damp, cold breath of the storm. Is there any other way? Elaine asked, her voice catching. The vet looked from Kael to Elaine. If we can't get that medication here within a few hours, he'll go critical. I can call nearby clinics, but the chances anyone has Cardivan are slim. Aria's small hand rested on Kael's back, feeling his fading warmth. Mom, Kael's strong. I think he wants to come home with me. Elaine held her daughter close, her gaze locked on the vet, clinging to any thread of hope. The injection slid through Kael's thick fur. He flinched, eyes half-lidded, holding on to the world through the sound of Aria's voice. The heart monitor's beeps steadied slightly, but the rhythm was still fragile. Outside, rain thickened, pounding the tin roof. The town's storm sirens wailed over the loudspeakers, warning everyone to stay indoors. Elaine knew every passing minute shaved away at Kael's chances. A veterinary nurse stepped in, murmuring something to the vet. He turned to Elaine. We've got contact from the local air rescue station. If there's a life-threatening emergency, they can request clearance for a helicopter. But we'll need official authorization, and flying in this storm will be a huge risk. Elaine glanced toward the window, watching the wind hurl raindrops into long streaks across the glass. In that instant, every memory of Kael surged through her. Each careful step guiding Aria each time he'd placed himself between her and danger. Each watchful glance that spoke of quiet duty. She could not let him fall here. I'll get the authorization. Just keep him alive until then, she said, her voice regaining steel. The vet nodded and adjusted the IV drip. The slow, measured fall of the medicine felt like the ticking of a clock counting down their window. Aria sat pressed against the table, her hand on Kael, murmuring about the morning walk by the lake, about Mr. Rowan's cookies, trying to keep him tethered with the warmth of their shared moments. Outside, the wind howled louder. Figures hurried past the clinic windows, all searching for shelter. Inside the small room, the air was heavy with antiseptic and urgency. Elaine stepped into the hall, pulled out her phone, and dialed a number she had never imagined calling. The only person she believed could open the way to the military hospital in this weather. When the line picked up, she spoke just 6 words. I need help. For Kael and my daughter. The rain hammered harder, like sand slipping through the final glass of an hourglass. The race against time had begun, and everyone understood that each passing second carried away another fraction of Kael's fragile hope. By morning, the storm had passed, leaving pools of rainwater scattered with fallen golden leaves across Silverpine streets. The sky hung heavy and gray, its dim light concealing whatever lay behind the clouds. Elaine had barely slept. Kael remained in intensive care, his heartbeat temporarily stable from the medication, but their time was running out. As Aria sat beside Kael's bed, Elaine stepped outside to make calls. She needed to understand why Carter had done what he did. The images from yesterday still gripped her. The crackling shot, the hard set of his eyes, the way he vanished into the chaos. This wasn't the reflex of an officer under pressure. It felt calculated. She began phoning contacts in rescue services and others who had once served with Carter. Most reacted with shock. But one former colleague from his special patrol unit lowered his voice when Elaine pressed him. I'm telling you this because I think you're in trouble. Carter's neck deep in debt. Lost a lot of money in a bad investment, then got into gambling. Word is he's been talking to loan sharks. A chill ran down Elaine's spine. The man on the line continued. These aren't ordinary loan sharks. They're tied to an international working dog trafficking ring. They target dogs with advanced training, especially rescue and guide dogs, because they fetch high prices overseas. Carter may have been forced to work for them to erase his debts. Elaine froze. The pieces began to fit together. Kael wasn't attacked because he was aggressive. He was targeted because he was rare. A former mountain rescue dog, highly trained, now bonded to a blind child. His value on the black market would be many times that of an ordinary dog. She jotted down the names and locations the caller provided. One in particular stood out. A long-abandoned warehouse on the southern outskirts, once suspected as a holding site before dogs were smuggled out of the state. Elaine recalled seeing closed, unmarked trucks pass through that area late at night, but she hadn't paid attention then. Leaving the clinic, Elaine drove out toward the site. Last night's rain had turned the dirt road into thick mud, the tires sinking and slipping on every turn. The warehouse emerged through the morning haze, a row of mottled brick walls, a rusted metal door still secured with a heavy lock. No sign of people, but fresh clues remained: deep tire tracks pressed into the mud, and a few strands of dog hair caught in the fence. Elaine photographed everything, sending the images to a friend, an investigative journalist. She knew she couldn't take these people on herself, but she could gather evidence to bring them into the light. Sitting in her car, she opened her tablet and searched for information on working dog trafficking. Old articles appeared. Pictures of dogs crammed into cages, eyes wide with fear. Details of how they were moved across borders under the guise of legal pet transport. Interviews with witnesses describing dogs sedated to slip through inspections. The more she read, the hotter the slow burn of anger inside her became. She thought of Kael, of the steady way he guided Aria across the street, of the unspoken trust between them. He wasn't just a dog. He was her daughter's eyes, her safety, her world. The thought of him being sold away, stripped of freedom, made her chest feel like stone. Back at the clinic, Elaine entered the recovery room quickly. Kael still lay there, his breathing slow but steadier than yesterday. Aria sat beside him, whispering about a dream she'd had, of golden leaves drifting over the lake. Elaine placed a hand on her daughter's shoulder, meeting Kael's faint but alert gaze. In that moment, she almost heard the silent promise in him: "I will not leave this girl." Elaine understood now. The fight to save Kael wasn't only a race against the storm or the 300 kilometers to Fort Albrin. It was a battle against a merciless trafficking network. If Carter had succeeded yesterday, Kael would have vanished without a trace. Outside, the wind was gentler, the clouds parting to let in pale streaks of light. But Elaine knew the real storm was still ahead. Not in the sky, but in the shadowed world, preying on loyal lives like Kael's. She smoothed his warm fur, then tightened her grip. "We're bringing you home, Kael, and we're ending this filthy game." It was in that moment she decided the journey to save Kael would go hand in hand with exposing the entire network, no matter the danger. That afternoon, the gray sky still pressed low over Silverpine, but the weight in Elaine's chest was heavier than the clouds. In the recovery room, Kael's heart monitor beeped steadily, though the green line still reminded her that every minute ticked closer to the edge. She had just returned from the abandoned warehouse, her mind filled with the tire tracks in the mud and the tufts of dog hair on the fence. Everything matched what she'd been told. Kael had not been a random victim. He had been in their sights from the start. The night before, in a small cafe by the lakeside, a friend who worked security at the docks had given her the missing piece. "I heard it from a truck driver who comes by the port. He said that yesterday, after using the taser, Carter was supposed to load the dog into a waiting truck at the corner of Ashfield. From there, they'd take it straight out of town. But the plan fell apart when the dog went into severe shock. Too risky to move without killing it, and that would have meant losing the payday." Elaine could picture it. Carter checking his watch, taser in hand, glancing toward the darkened corner where a truck sat hidden. Then Kael collapsing, his body convulsing, every calculation unraveling. You couldn't transport a dying dog and still expect a profit, so they'd had to abort, leaving Carter to slip away in the confusion. This was no gang of petty thieves. They hunted elite dogs, rescue guide police canines, then sold them abroad for 10, even 20 times the price. Those dogs would be worked to exhaustion or traded again like merchandise. Heat flared in Elaine's chest. They had nearly taken Kael, and though Aria would never say it, losing him would have meant losing part of her world. She glanced at her daughter sitting in the chair beside the bed, telling Kael about the sound of leaves by the lake that morning. The shepherd's ears twitched faintly, weak but listening. Elaine knew she couldn't just wait for Cardavent to arrive from the military clinic. She needed another layer of protection, somewhere strong enough to keep these people at bay if they came back. One name rose in her mind: the National Service Animal Protection Organization, a network of former military handlers, trainers, and veterinarians dedicated to defending and rehabilitating working animals in danger. She picked up her phone and dialed the regional office. After a few rings, a deep male voice answered. "This is Jonathan Hale, Northeast Regional Director. How can I help you?" Elaine drew a deep breath, then told him everything. From the taser attack in the park, the information about Carter, the traces at the warehouse, to her suspicions about the dog trafficking ring. Jonathan listened without interrupting, only asking for a few clarifying details. When she finished, he said, "What you've described matches a case we've been tracking. We've suspected this group for a long time, but we've lacked direct evidence. Kael, if he really was a mountain rescue dog, he's exactly the kind they hunt." Elaine tightened her grip on the phone. "I need to protect Kael until the medicine arrives. And I want to work with you to put an end to this." On the other end, Jonathan was silent for a beat, then replied firmly, "We'll send a team to Silverpine immediately. You need to prepare. Limit your movements. Don't share Kael's condition with anyone outside your trust. And remember, from this point on, any stranger near the clinic could be part of their chain." When the call ended, Elaine scanned the room. The wooden door was shut, curtains drawn against the gray light outside. She knew that even lying motionless in recovery, Kael was still a target. The difference now was that the hunters had been seen, and the game would no longer be simple. Outside wind from the lake rose again, carrying the briny dampness of water and earth. Elaine stood beside Kael's bed, her hand resting on his back, a silent vow that no one would touch him again. In her eyes, worry and resolve had fused into a single thing, protecting her family, no matter who stood against her. By late afternoon, the light outside the hospital window had dimmed to pale strips in a sky that still seemed reluctant to release its hold on the storm. Elaine had just finished helping Aria with her meal when a knock sounded, measured but firm. The door opened to reveal a tall man with broad shoulders and neatly trimmed silver hair. His long navy coat was speckled with rain leather shoes, marking wet prints on the floor. His eyes went immediately to Kael, then to Aria. In those deep gray irises was the sharp observation of someone who had stood through hundreds of rescue missions, but also something gentler, harder to read. Elaine stood quickly. "You're Jonathan Hale." He nodded, stepping forward to shake her hand, a firm clasp carrying the quiet confidence of a man accustomed to crisis. "I'm the Northeast Regional Director of the National Service Animal Protection Organization. You must be Elaine Collins." Elaine nodded, but before she could reply, he knelt down to Aria's level. The girl sat quietly in her chair, fingers curling lightly around Kael's leash. Jonathan's voice was low, warm. "You must be Aria." Aria tilted her head, her clear eyes turning toward the sound. "Yes, I heard my mom talk about you." Jonathan smiled faintly, something stirring in his gaze. From his coat pocket he drew a beige handkerchief, its edge embroidered with a maple leaf pattern worn soft with age. Elaine recognized it instantly, her late mother-in-law's handiwork, a stitching style only she had. Her chest tightened. Jonathan inhaled, as though gathering courage. "Aria, I'm your grandfather." The words fell into the room like a heavy drop into still water. Elaine's mind snagged on a locked-away memory. Her husband's few careful stories about the father who had served in rescue operations but had vanished from their lives after a deep family rift. Aria tilted her head again, processing. Grandfather? You mean you're my dad's dad? That's right, Jonathan said softly. I've been away for a long time, but I've never stopped watching over my family. I'm here now, for you and for Kael. Elaine's emotions swirled. Surprise, guardedness, but also an undeniable flicker of warmth. Why now, she asked, unable to hide the edge in her voice. Jonathan met her eyes steadily. When Aria's father passed, I tried to find a way back in, but the wounds between me and my son were too deep. I thought staying away might be better for you both. But when I heard about Kael and the danger you're in, I couldn't stay away any longer. He stood and handed Elaine a slim folder. This is everything my organization has on the trafficking group. We've been tracking them for months, but now that they've set their sights on Kael, our time is short. Elaine opened the folder to grainy photos taken from a distance, rows of iron cages crammed into trucks, shadowed figures moving at night, and a list of missing dogs, many of them working animals. The last pages held a route map out of the state ending at a small port near the border. Aria stayed beside Kael, listening. She spoke softly. Can you help Kael? Jonathan placed a hand gently on her shoulder. I'll do everything I can. We'll get him to the military veterinary hospital where they have the medicine and equipment he needs. And after that, no one will be able to take him from you. Elaine saw Aria's face brighten just slightly. She realized that no matter the history, Jonathan's presence was now an anchor in this storm. Jonathan turned to her. I've contacted the air rescue unit. A helicopter will be ready in a few hours as soon as the weather window opens. Until then, we need to make sure this clinic is secure. My people will be posted outside. In the hallway, footsteps echoed, blending with the wind seeping through the doorframe. Elaine felt the tension shift into something sharper. Resolve and hope. In this small room between the beeping machines and Kael's fragile heartbeat, an invisible thread bound the three of them. Not just by blood, but by a shared promise to face what was coming together. Upstairs in a makeshift conference room, a large map was spread across the table. The cold fluorescent light glinted off metal pins, marking locations. Jonathan stood at the head of the table, marker in hand, his expression taut yet focused, eyes bright with calculation. Elaine sat to the left, while Aria occupied a chair by the door, silently stroking Kael's head, where he rested inside a portable transport crate beside her. The shepherd's eyes opened halfway, his ears twitching faintly at the sound of Jonathan's deep, steady voice. We have two objectives, Jonathan began. First, to get Kael to the military veterinary hospital at Fort Brooke in time for Cardivent to stabilize his heart. Second, to take down the trafficking group that targeted him. Saving Kael alone still leaves the danger for other dogs, and for the children who depend on them. On the map spread across the table, he circled 3 points in red: the current clinic, the warehouse on the southern outskirts, and the small port near the eastern border. According to my intel tonight, they'll consolidate at the warehouse before moving the new shipment to the port. If we time it right, we can get Kael onto the helicopter for Fort Brooke and hit them at the same moment, taking them down and rescuing the other dogs. A man in tactical fatigue's hair cropped close stepped forward. Our Special Operations Unit is ready, sir. 2 teams will coordinate. Team 1 escorts Kael and Elaine to the Black Hawk at Landing Zone 3. Team 2 surrounds the warehouse. Once the Black Hawk is airborne, the signal will trigger Team 2 to breach. Jonathan nodded. This has to stay airtight. Carter, or any of their inside men, could still be watching. If they get wind of this, the whole plan collapses. Elaine studied the map, heart pounding. The thought of keeping Kael safe while a full-scale raid unfolded made her tense, but also lit a quiet resolve inside her. She turned to Jonathan. "I'll go with Kael on the helicopter. But are you sure they can catch them all?" Jonathan's reply was immediate, steady. "I've hunted them for months. This time, they won't get away." Outside the window, the wind carried the scent of fresh rain pine needles, whispering like the low murmur of the forest around Silverpine Lake. Jonathan marked the Black Hawk's flight path with his pen. A route skirting the storm's remnants, threading through fog-bound mountain ranges before descending into Fort Brooke. Aria, who had been listening silently, spoke up. "If you catch them, the other dogs will get to go home, right?" Jonathan paused, then bent down to meet the blind, but feeling eyes of his granddaughter. "Yes, I promise." Minutes later, the meeting broke. The tactical unit moved out, checking tear gas launchers, bolt cutters, dog leads, and transport crates. Jonathan handed Elaine a dark blue rescue jacket, the organization's insignia stitched over the chest. "Wear this. Anyone who sees it will know you're with us. It'll lower the risk of being stopped." Outside the clinic, the matte black Blackhawk stood ready, its massive rotors turning slow, slicing through the damp afternoon mist. The engine's low thunder rolled across the ground, vibrating in Elaine's chest. She had never seen anything that felt so much like both a shield and a warning. At the door, Jonathan gave final instructions. "Once you're airborne, keep Kael calm. The pain medication will help. We'll stay in contact over a secure channel. If anything changes, follow the pilot's lead." Elaine nodded, tightening her grip on the transport crate handle. Kael opened his eyes to meet hers, weak but resolute. Aria stepped forward, leaned close, and whispered a wish for luck in his ear, her voice so soft it could have been stolen by the wind. As the team moved out, Elaine glanced once more down the clinic hallway. She knew that behind those doors, the other half of the plan was taking shape. And once the Black Hawk lifted off, two battles would begin, at the same time, one to save a life and one to break a criminal chain. The rotor wash tore loose the last golden leaves on the lot, swirling them upward before they vanished into the gray. In that moment, Elaine knew this was no longer just an extraction. This was the line between running and standing her ground. For Kael, for Aria, and for every loyal life still waiting to be saved. The Black Hawk's rotors ripped through the heavy, damp air as it rose from the pad beside the clinic. The Silverpine sky hung in thick, smoky gray clouds, coiling in weighted bands, warning that the storm hadn't fully retreated. Thin slashes of lightning flickered along the horizon, briefly exposing the jagged silhouettes of mountain ridges blocking their route. Elaine sat close to Kael, the stretcher bolted to the floor, trembling with every shudder of wind. Beneath the rescue blanket, his body trembled faintly. His eyes cracked open, their focus dim as though holding on to the last strands of awareness. Each time the heart monitor let out a longer than normal beep, Elaine held her breath. The pilot, a veteran whose face was washed in the green glow of cockpit lights, turned toward Jonathan opposite him. "We're heading into stronger winds. If the storm shifts a few nautical miles, we'll need to either climb or divert east." Jonathan nodded briskly, eyes fixed on the flight map. "We can't lose more than 10 minutes. Kael doesn't have that time." Outside, rain lashed sideways, fat drops, hitting the windshield like gravel, hissing against the glass. A sudden crosswind tilted the helicopter hard, forcing Elaine to grip the side rail for balance. Kael gave a weak whine, his nose nudging her hand, as if searching for reassurance. "He's fading," Elaine called over the roar of the rotors. "His heart's unstable." A medic across from her immediately checked the oxygen mask and monitors, adjusting the IV line before looking to Jonathan. "We need steadier air to give the booster before we reach the hospital." Jonathan glanced out the side window. Walls of black cloud twisting, lightning flashing just long enough to light the cockpit. He made the call. "Drop lower. Hug the mountain ridges. The wind will be weaker there, even if visibility's worse. The Black Hawk banked sharply, rotors groaning against the shift before settling into a lower altitude. Through the misted glass, moss-covered cliffs, slid past waterfalls breaking into thick veils of spray that clung to the windows. In the cabin, Kael's breaths came heavy each rise and fall of his chest. Tightening the grip in Elaine's own, she leaned down, her voice a steady whisper against the storm. "Hold on, Kael. We're almost there." A flash of lightning outside caught in Kael's eyes, as if sparking a faint, fragile light. The medic seized the brief moment when the helicopter steadied to inject the booster shot. The pilot's voice came over the intercom. 5 minutes until we're clear of the main storm band. After that, just headwinds." Those 5 minutes felt like an hour. Every sharp jolt made Elaine think the floor might tear loose, but her hand stayed firm on Kael's back, passing warmth into him. Jonathan's gaze never left the clock, and coordinates each second etched into the cabin's tension. At last, the heavy hammering of rain began to thin, replaced by the steadier rush of wind. The clouds ahead loosened, revealing the dim flicker of Fort Brooke's beacon lights in the distance. Elaine exhaled, but her hand told her Kael's body was colder than before. Time was still the enemy. As the Black Hawk banked toward the military veterinary hospital, only one prayer filled her chest. Don't let it be too late. Outside, the sky still carried the storm's gray, but ahead a pale seam of light opened, a narrow road of hope. Wind still clung to the Black Hawk's frame, but every set of eyes in the cabin was locked on the distant blinking lights of Fort Brooke. Kael lay motionless on the stretcher, breath heavy. Elaine pressed her palm more firmly to his back, as if to hold on to each faint heartbeat. Jonathan checked his watch, then signaled the pilot to hold a steady line. On the other side of the operation, the southern skyline split with the cold glare of searchlights. Team 2, clad in tactical gear, crept toward a sagging warehouse hidden behind barbed fencing. The rain had eased, but the ground was still ankle-deep in mud. A voice crackled through every earpiece. "Team 1 is in the safe zone. Proceed to Phase 2. 2 advance operators quickly disabled the wall-mounted security cameras. Another moved to the heavy steel doors, cutting a gap just wide enough to slip a hand through and release the lock. The hinges groaned open, spilling the smell of mold and the rank stench of animals caged too long. Inside, flashlight beams swept over rows of stacked cages. Barking and high-pitched whining echoed off the walls, mixed with the frantic scrape of claws on metal. Many of the dogs, German Shepherds and other breeds, were chained short, eyes wide in terror. A silver-coated shepherd strained toward the light as if begging to be pulled free. "Begin rescue," the team leader ordered. Bolt cutters snapped locks. Operators lifted the dogs out, wrapping them in silver rescue blankets for warmth, rushing them to the transport trucks waiting outside. The barking shifted. Less panic now, more excitement at leaving the dark behind. Back in the helicopter, Elaine looked up when Kael turned his head faintly toward her ears, twitching as though hearing something far away. Jonathan leaned close and murmured, "Team 2 is inside. They're getting the dogs out." Elaine gave a slight nod, a flicker of relief passing through her, before her gaze returned to Kael. Every second still mattered. At the warehouse, another squad located a locked room at the end of a narrow corridor. The door was thick steel, the lock new and heavy, likely where the highest value dogs were kept. After several cuts and a hard kick, it swung open to reveal 4 individual crates, each holding a strong-built shepherd, their eyes dulled by fatigue. One wore an intact ID collar, a K9 gone missing 3 months earlier. "Move these first." "Top priority," the commander's voice barked over comms. Outside, the transport trucks filled steadily. Each dog was secured, covered for warmth, and checked against identification lists to ensure they'd be returned to their units or families. In the Black Hawk's cockpit, Jonathan received the signal. Warehouse secured. All dogs safe. No casualties? He glanced at Elaine with a brief smile, though his tone stayed focused. Half the mission is done. Now we get Kael to the finish. Elaine drew a deeper breath, the tight band around her chest loosening a little, though she wouldn't let herself relax until Kael was out of danger. At the warehouse with the last dog loaded, the commander signaled withdrawal. The transport convoy vanished into the mist, leaving the gutted building to the whistling wind through empty cages. Up in the air, the Blackhawks still clawed through headwinds. Fort Brooke's lights now shone clear. Kael's eyes were half closed, but his breathing was a touch steadier after the booster. Elaine's hand smoothed over his sweat-damp fur, feeling the steady, stubborn pulse beneath, like a promise to reach safety with them. The rotor's rhythm drummed through the cabin, until another sound cut through it, a long, unbroken tone from the heart monitor, followed by silence. Elaine's eyes snapped wide. Her hand on Kael's back felt the stillness. "Cardiac arrest," the medic shouted, diving to the stretcher. Jonathan unbuckled instantly, shifting aside to give room. Elaine's world tilted, but instinct made her pull Aria close, pressing the girl toward Kael. "Aria, hold him. Talk to him about the first day you met. Don't let him drift." The girl nodded sharply, her small hands trembling on Kael's shoulders. The wind buffeted the helicopter, rattling the cabin, but Aria's voice rose, clear and urgent. "Kael, I remember it was spring. Mom took me to the pier, and I heard the water lapping against the shore, the wind in the trees. I didn't know what you looked like then, but I heard your paws on the wooden boards, steady and strong. You stopped in front of me, your breath warm, your fur smelling like sunshine. I reached out, and you let me touch your head so gently, like you didn't want to startle me. Do you remember?" The medic pressed down on Kael's chest. Steady, rapid compressions. Sweat beaded along his brow, and the pilot shouted into the radio, demanding clearance for an emergency landing. Jonathan sat close, his gaze fixed on Kael as though willing him back. "You remember the time you tripped over that rock on the way home?" Kael Aria's voice cracked, but kept going. "You stood right in front of me so I could hold on to your neck. From that day I knew we'd be friends who'd never leave each other." A sudden jolt sent the entire cabin swaying. Elaine held Aria tightly with one arm, the other hand resting on Kael's paw, searching for even the smallest fight left in him. Then, a short, sharp beep, followed by the slow, rhythmic pulse of a heartbeat on the monitor. Everyone froze, eyes locked on the numbers climbing back into range. The medic drew a deep breath, his face glistening with sweat. "He's back. But we need the ER, now." Aria leaned in close, whispering one last time. "You have to stay with me, Kael. We still have so many mornings by the lake." Kael's ear twitched as if in answer. Elaine's eyes stung, but a trembling smile found her lips. Jonathan placed a hand on her shoulder, his voice steady. "We'll get him there." Outside, Fort Brooke's lights shone brighter, like a beacon calling them in. Yet inside the helicopter, the moment just passed would be carved forever into memory. The instant when time seemed to stop, and only a single fragile thread held between life and loss, bound by love and shared history. The steady beep of the vitals monitor became a simple, miraculous song. After a cardiac arrest that felt impossible to overcome, each returning beat was slow but sure. The entire cabin seemed to exhale together, as though releasing a weight that had been suspended over them the whole flight. Aria stayed right by Kael's side, her small hands resting on his back. She could feel each breath like tiny waves returning to shore. When Kael's eyes opened just slightly, the look in them, tired yet familiar, made her throat tighten. "He's looking at me, Mom." Her voice trembled with joy. Elaine said nothing, simply stroked down his spine, feeling his fur grow warmer beneath her palm. Across from them, Jonathan's normally stern gaze softened, a small smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "Well done, Kael. You fought like a true warrior." The medic rechecked the monitors and nodded to Elaine. "Vitals are better, but he still needs the ER immediately to avoid complications. 8 minutes to touchdown." Outside, the rain had thinned, leaving only the wind curling around the fuselage. In the cabin, tension slowly gave way to a quiet sense of relief. Elaine smiled faintly, her eyes still rimmed red. "You see, Aria? He heard you and came back." Aria leaned her head on her mother's shoulder, never looking away from Kael. "I promised him. He still owes me so many mornings at the lake." Kael blinked slowly, his ears shifting at her voice, and the monitor's rhythm seemed steadier, more certain. Jonathan watched, feeling something inside himself ease. Years of leading rescue operations had shown him countless life-and-death moments. But this connection between a blind girl and her dog, in the narrow space between survival and loss, gave meaning to every fight he had ever joined. The pilot's voice came over comms 5 minutes to landing. Visibility improving, runway in sight. The medic checked Kael's straps, ensuring the stretcher was secure. Elaine and Aria leaned closer, as if shielding him from any more strain. Outside, Fort Brooks lights cast warm gold beams across the cabin, painting the air with the color of hope. As the rotors slowed and the helicopter began its descent, Aria whispered, "You hear that, Kael? We're almost home." He couldn't answer in words, but his slow blink and deeper breaths told everyone he was still here, ready to keep going. No one held back their tears now. They weren't tears of fear, but of relief and joy, the kind that came when a miracle unfolded in the middle of a storm. The night sky was a thick blanket of gray clouds, but beneath it the golden lights of Fort Brooks Military Veterinary Hospital glowed like an island in the dark. The Blackhawk's rotors slowed, sending spirals of water vapor curling from the ground. The engine's roar faded into the sound of hurried footsteps from the waiting medical team. As the skids touched down, the cabin doors swung open. 2 Army veterinarians and a technician rolled a specialized gurney straight in. A mobile spotlight cut through the gloom, reflecting off Kael's sweat-damp fur. One doctor crouched, scanned the monitor, then nodded sharply. "Stable for transport. ER2, priority." Elaine knelt by Kael before they wheeled him away, her hand running down his back, cheek pressed to his warm fur as if pouring the last of her strength into him. "We'll see you soon, Kael. She's waiting for you." Aria clutched her mother's hand, her clouded eyes turned toward the sound of urgent footsteps. She whispered, small, but certain, "Kael knows. He's coming back to me." Jonathan rested a hand on Elaine's shoulder, his calm, focused gaze carrying the weight of countless emergencies, but never without faith. "They'll give him the best we have. I'll stay to coordinate, take her to the waiting room, and rest a bit." Elaine nodded, guiding Aria away from the landing pad. The glass doors of the treatment wing slid open, letting in warmth and the clean scent of antiseptic. The sounds here were different, quieter but threaded with the urgency of footsteps and distant machinery. The hallway leading to the waiting area was lit by strips of white LED lights, casting a clean and orderly glow. Elaine chose a row of seats against the wall, so Aria could lean back, the girl's small hands clasped together, as if holding on to a silent prayer. "Mom, it smells like the day I went for my eye exam," Aria murmured. Elaine smiled faintly, smoothing her daughter's soft hair. "Yes, that's the smell of antiseptic. But here it also carries the scent of successful treatments." Outside, Jonathan strode quickly toward the operations command room. On a large screen, a map displayed the warehouse area, just rated bright markers tracking the movement of transport vehicles. A young officer reported, "All dogs have been moved to the secure holding zone. No casualties. Primary suspects are in custody." Jonathan nodded. Good. Forward the identification data to Federal Animal Protection. I'll finish the report after Kael's surgery is over. In the waiting room, time seemed to slow. The ticking of the wall clock blended with the steady hum of the air conditioner, creating a calm, rhythmic backdrop. Aria tilted her head slightly as if listening to something only she could hear. I can hear it. Like Kael's heartbeat, Mom. Not too fast, but clear. Elaine's smile deepened warm and gentle. Then keep that sound in your heart. It will guide Kael back to you. A nurse walked in holding a cup of hot water for Elaine. We're preparing for cardiac intervention. The head surgeon will perform it personally. Rest assured, he's one of the finest specialists in veterinary cardiology. Elaine accepted the cup with quiet thanks, her eyes still fixed on the hallway to the surgical wing. From outside the waiting room came the sound of Jonathan's footsteps. He stepped in, bringing with him the night's cool wind and a strange sense of reassurance. Sitting beside Aria, he asked softly, Do you still remember the first day you met Kael? Aria nodded eagerly, a small smile brightening her face. I've already told him about it. Today I'll tell him again when he wakes up. Jonathan exchanged a glance with Elaine. No words were needed. Between them, the worry felt lighter, replaced by a shared belief that Kael was fighting, just as he once had, in the freezing mountains. Outside, the rain had stopped. Through the waiting room's wide glass windows, streetlights reflected off the wet pavement, shimmering like a fallen band of stars. Elaine gently squeezed Aria's hand, feeling its warmth, and held on to the belief that somewhere beyond the hospital doors, a brave heart was still beating. Waiting for the day it could return to Silverpine Lake. In the Federal Investigative Unit's interrogation room, the pale yellow light fell over a cold steel table. Carter sat with his head bowed, his clasped hands bone white from tension. Hours earlier, he had witnessed the entire raid unfold. The warehouse sealed off rows of heavy steel cages carrying working dogs wheeled out to safety. Every bark had cut into him, bringing back the moment Kael collapsed under the crack of a stun gun. Across from him, Investigator Mitchell patiently placed a thick folder on the table, its cover stamped with the emblem of the National Service Animal Protection Agency. Carter, you know why we need to hear this from you directly. We have evidence, but we want your account, from the start. Carter lifted his head, his eyes dulled with exhaustion. His voice was hoarse. I owed a lot of money. A man claiming to be a potential client approached me, promised to clear my debts if I assisted in recovering a dog. At first I thought it was just retrieving a runaway service dog, but later I realized they were targeting Kael. Mitchell turned a surveillance photo toward him. Carter in a park, a stun gun in hand, Kael and Aria in the distance. Go on. Carter exhaled heavily, his fingers tightening as if trying to crush the memory. Their plan was to disable Kael in public, then get him into a vehicle fast. Kael's a famous rescue dog. He can locate people in extreme weather. On the black market, his value is beyond imagination. I tried to back out, but they threatened my family. Mitchell paused for a few seconds, then closed the file. We've arrested the core members of this dog trafficking ring. Their foreign partners are under investigation as well. Can you help identify and provide contact details for the rest? Carter nodded, a mix of regret and relief in his eyes. I'll tell you everything. Just let Kael make it through. News of the case spread quickly. International media outlets reported on the dismantling of a transnational working dog trafficking ring. Photographs from the rescue, dozens of dogs of various breeds, many still bearing wounds, circulated widely on social media. Animal protection groups from Europe to Asia sent messages of thanks to the Joint Task Force in Silverpine. Many articles called it one of the largest arrests linked to service dog trafficking in a decade. In a brief press conference, Jonathan said only one sentence. These animals have spent their lives saving people. They deserve to live and be loved, not turned into merchandise. Outside, Aria sat with Elaine in the waiting area, listening to snippets of news from a handheld radio brought by a nurse. She smiled faintly when she heard Jonathan's voice. Mom, Grandpa's right. Kael didn't just save me. He saved many other dogs too. Elaine squeezed her daughter's hand, pride welling deep inside her. The past days had been a storm, but from within that chaos, the truth had emerged. A truth that not only cleared Kael's name, but also opened the door to change the fate of countless lives once caged. In the temporary holding cell, Carter sat in silence. He knew he would pay the price, but at least the shadow had been dragged into the light. And somewhere not far away behind the white doors of the surgical ward, Kael's heart kept beating, living proof of why he had chosen to tell it all. Winter morning light spilled softly through the large recovery room window, stretching into pale golden stripes across the white tile floor. The steady beeping of the heart monitor played like a quiet, grounding melody in the stillness. Elaine sat at the edge of the bed, her hand wrapped gently around Kael's large paw, feeling the warmth seep into her fingers. Over the past days, she had grown used to the scent of antiseptic, the faint, metallic rattle of hospital carts, and the rhythm of Kael's heartbeat pulsing from the small machine beside the bed. Aria sat in a chair by the window, her ears attuned to every sound in the room. She had been here every day telling Kael endless stories. About mornings at Silverpine Lake, the smell of fresh pastries from Mr. Rowan's bakery, and the rustle of leaves along the trail where the two friends always walked. This morning, as Elaine's hand smoothed over Kael's thick amber coat, she felt the faintest shift, so slight it might have been imagined. She froze, leaning in closer. Aria, I think Kael just moved. Aria immediately sat up straight, her small hands tracing the edge of the bed until they found the rise and fall of Kael's body. Kael, I'm here. Open your eyes. The monitor's beeps quickened slightly. Elaine and Aria turned toward him, and then, slowly, his eyelids trembled. 1 second, 2 seconds. Then deep brown eyes opened, the light catching in them, as if warming the entire room. Kael Aria's voice broke with a mix of trembling and joy. Kael tilted his head ever so slightly, ears turning toward the familiar voice. His front paw made a small, deliberate movement, as though reaching for her. Elaine smiled through tears that slipped freely down her cheeks. Welcome home, brave boy. Aria knelt beside the bed, her arms circling his neck. She pressed her cheek into the warmth of his fur, feeling the steady heartbeat beneath the strong muscle. Kael drew in a slow, deep breath, as if memorizing the scent he knew so well, then closed his eyes again in a newfound peace. Jonathan stepped in at that moment, still holding a stack of documents. When he saw the scene before him, the sternness usually etched on his face gave way to a quiet, genuine smile. This one certainly knows how to make an entrance, he said softly. Elaine turned, joy still shining in her eyes. The doctor says he's stable. Just a few more weeks of recovery now. Jonathan set the files on the table and came closer, resting a large hand on Kael's head, running it gently down the bridge of his nose. You fought like a true warrior, Kael. That whole morning, Aria never left his side. She whispered her plans for when he got better. That they'd walk the lake shore again, sit and listen to the water lapping the bank, and breathe in the smell of fresh bread still warm from the oven. Kael lay quietly, eyes half closed, but his ears turned toward her voice, as if every word was its own healing medicine. Outside the window, the sun had climbed higher, flooding the room with light. Elaine knew this was a moment she would carry forever. The day Kael opened his eyes again, bringing with him all the hope, love, and strength the entire town had poured into him. Only days after his awakening, Kael's story with Aria spread far beyond Silverpine, rippling outward like the gentle rings on a still morning lake. It began with a special feature on the state television network, chronicling Kael's rescue, the fight against the dog trafficking ring, and the moment he opened his eyes beside Aria. The images. A blind girl kneeling by an amber-coated German Shepherd, her small arms wrapped around his neck, struck deep into the hearts of millions. Within 24 hours, video clips were shared across every social platform. Hashtags like Kael the Hero Service, Dogs Deserve Better, and Aria. And Kael began to flood the feeds. People weren't just sharing it as proof of loyalty and friendship, but as a rallying cry to protect the service dogs, quietly dedicating their lives to others. Elaine received hundreds of messages from strangers, veterans who had served with canine partners, families of children with disabilities supported by guide dogs, even people who had never owned a dog but felt deeply moved. A mother from Texas wrote, seeing Aria and Kael, "I understand what true trust means. I hope my daughter finds a friend like that someday." Jonathan, as director of the National Service Animal Protection Organization, recognized it as the perfect moment to push for nationwide change. He called a press conference urging lawmakers to strengthen penalties for crimes against service dogs and to allocate federal funds specifically for medical care and retraining for those injured in duty. Broadcast live. Jonathan stood behind a wooden podium, his voice low but unwavering. Service dogs are not just tools. They are teammates, protectors, and sometimes the only bridge between a person and the world. Any harm done to them is a direct attack on the safety and dignity of the person they serve. The speech spread quickly. International animal welfare groups sent letters of support pledging to join the campaign. In Europe, a police canine association even proposed holding a medal ceremony in Kael's honor. Meanwhile, in Silverpine, Aria's days stayed much the same. Mornings at the hospital, telling Kael's stories, afternoons at home with her mother. She didn't fully grasp the scale of the media wave unfolding, but she could feel that everyone seemed to smile more when they spoke Kael's name. One evening, as mother and daughter sat in the living room, Elaine opened her laptop and played a national radio news segment. The story of blind girl Aria Collins and her service dog Kael has inspired millions. Organizations from multiple states have petitioned Congress to review a service dog protection bill. Aria tilted her head, a small smile forming. "Mom, if there's a new law, other dogs will be safer, right?" Elaine nodded. "Yes, sweetheart." And it all started with the journey you and Kael took together. Outside, the night wrapped around the town of Silverpine, the lake mirroring the lights of houses until they shimmered like fallen stars scattered across its dark surface. Inside the small home, mother and daughter sat close, knowing now that their story belonged to many hearts, and that this wave would continue to travel outward stronger and farther until every service dog received the protection they deserved. A brilliant May morning found Washington, D.C. wearing its formal face, yet brimming with life. The sky stretched a deep, flawless blue. The cherry blossoms along the avenues had already shed their blooms, revealing tender green leaves swaying in the mild breeze. In the distance, the white dome of the United States Capitol gleamed under sunlight, a bright symbol for the changes waiting to be written into history. On the steps leading to the grand building, 8-year-old Aria stood beside Elaine, her hand holding firmly to Kael's leash. The German Shepherd's amber coat glowed warmly under the sun, catching golden light every time he lifted his head. He looked stronger than ever, moving with an easy confidence, ears turning toward passing sounds, but his gaze always fixed on Aria. Inside, the great hall was filled to capacity. Senators, federal officials, representatives from animal welfare organizations, and reporters from every corner of the country. On the podium hung a large sign with bold letters, "Signing Ceremony, Kael's Promise Act." Jonathan Hale, dressed in a deep navy suit, stood near the front. Pride and emotion mingled in his eyes when he saw Aria and Kael enter. Stepping down, he knelt slightly to shake Aria's hand and rest a warm palm on Kael's head. Today, he said quietly, "You're not just guests. You are the reason we are here." The host outlined the background of the law. Kael's Promise Act was the result of a year-long campaign, strengthening maximum penalties for attacks, abduction, or trafficking of service dogs, ensuring lifetime federal medical care for those injured in duty, and creating Kael's Fund to help families with children with disabilities access professionally trained service dogs. Applause swelled as the president entered, smiling warmly at Aria and Kael. He bent down, offering his hand for Kael to sniff, a polite gesture toward a four-legged guest of honor. Kael's tail gave a small wag, his eyes brightening, and the hall erupted in affectionate laughter. Today, the president began, "We are not simply signing a legal document. We are honoring the service and sacrifice of silent friends, four-legged warriors who protect and walk beside us." The story of Kael and Aria reminds us that loyalty and love can transform an entire society. An aide placed the bill on the desk. The black fountain pen moved smoothly, leaving bold strokes across the page. When the president signed the final line, applause rang through the chamber, echoing beneath the dome. Aria could not see the moment, but she felt it. The rush of clapping hands, the sound of footsteps drawing near, and the warm timbre of the president's voice as he knelt beside her. "Aria, thank you for sharing Kael with the nation. And Kael," he patted the dog's shoulder, "thank you for keeping your promise to protect this girl." Elaine's hand rested on her daughter's shoulder. Jonathan stood beside them. All three looked toward Kael, who seemed to understand this was no ordinary day. He lifted his head, amber eyes shining with pride, tail giving a slow, deliberate wave like a soldier's salute. When the ceremony ended, Aria, Kael, and Elaine stepped out onto the Capitol steps. Hundreds waited, waving small flags and holding signs with Kael's picture. Amid chants of "Thank you, Kael," the German Shepherd stepped forward, standing tall beside Aria, breathing in the Capitol's air as the sunlight poured over him. That day, Kael's promise became part of the law, and from that moment on, thousands of service dogs would be protected as he had protected Aria. That summer, Silverpine welcomed a special change, not just in the nation's laws, but within the small lakeside home of Elaine's family. Jonathan Hale, after years of constant travel and offices stacked with case files, decided to move permanently to Silverpine, living with Elaine, Aria, and Kael. The home, already warm, now brimmed with even more laughter and connection. Jonathan, with silver hair and a deep, steady voice, quickly became a natural part of the rhythm. Mornings found him brewing coffee with Elaine. Afternoons, he walked Kael around the lake while Aria practiced piano. Evenings, he told stories from his days leading rescue missions, lacing each tale with gentle lessons on patience and teamwork. Aria was delighted that Kael now had a companion for the hours she spent at school. Kael returned the favor by waiting for Jonathan at the door each morning, tail swaying, when he appeared with the leash in hand. His amber coat shone in the sun, becoming a familiar and comforting sight in the neighborhood. One of the biggest changes Jonathan brought was community engagement. Aria, Kael, and Mr. Rowan, the longtime neighbor, began hosting regular public events about the role of service dogs. They set up a small booth in the town's central park, where children could learn how to interact with and care for dogs, while adults received information about Kael's Promise Act. Kael was always the star. He sat patiently beside Aria, letting children gently pet him and ask questions. Sometimes Jonathan would stand, his hand resting lightly on Kael's back. "Dogs like Kael don't just help," he would say, "they give their partners confidence and a sense of safety. It's a two-way bond, both caring for each other." Mr. Rowan, with his warm storyteller's voice, often began each event with a memory from Kael's days in Silverpine. like the time he guided Aria away from a fallen branch after a storm, or the winter morning he stood guard at the porch so she wouldn't slip on the ice. Their efforts didn't stop at the park. Together they began visiting nursing homes and rehabilitation centers. In those quiet spaces, Kael radiated a rare sense of calm. He would sit close beside elderly residents, breathing softly into their hands, letting his deep brown eyes convey safety and warmth without a single word. Aria, too, learned to connect with more people, her voice carrying a new confidence each time she introduced her four-legged friend. One late afternoon, as the sunset stretched across the lake, Elaine stood on the porch and saw three figures, Jonathan, Aria, and Kael, walking side by side along the winding trail. Their shadows lengthened over the grass, blending with the sound of gentle waves and the sweet scent of wildflowers. In that moment, Elaine realized that home was never just a place. It was the people and creatures who shared love, built memories, and wove them into the fabric of everyday life. Since Jonathan moved in, their home had become more than a family of three. It was now a small center of kindness and connection. Every story, every community event seemed to begin with one simple bond between a young girl and her brave German Shepherd. The sun was dipping lower, casting golden ribbons across the still waters of Silverpine. The lake reflected a sky alive with color. Warm orange, radiant gold, and the faintest violet. A breeze drifted through, carrying the scent of maple leaves and wild grass, rippling the surface in tiny waves that seemed to smile. Aria, taller now than a year before, strolled along the lakeside path with Kael's leash firmly in hand. His amber coat glowed in the fading light, each step matching hers with steady rhythm. Every so often, Kael tilted his head, his ears catching the layered sounds of the world. Birds calling from the treetops, water lapping at the shore, and the light patter of Aria's footsteps beside his own. This path was where their journey had begun. On a misty autumn morning, when Aria still walked with cautious steps, and Kael was new to their family. Today, every stride carried the memory of that first day. Not to recall the hardships, but to honor the distance they had traveled together. When they reached the curve overlooking the lake, Aria stopped. Turning her face toward Kael, she ran her hand gently from his neck to his shoulder. Her voice was quiet, yet certain. "Kael, we've come all this way together, and we'll keep going." Kael lifted his head, his deep brown eyes warm and steady, answering with a soft nudge against her hand, their silent way of saying, "I understand." Far beyond the sunset embraced Silverpine Lake, each shimmering wave holding a wordless promise. A breeze passed, setting the small ribbon on Kael's leash, trembling. And in that moment, Aria thought she could hear the whispers of nature, of memory, and of her own heart. Always together. Elaine and Jonathan stood a little way behind, watching without a word. They knew this was more than just an ordinary evening. It was a quiet milestone where friendship, loyalty, and love met beneath the gentle light of day's end. As the sun touched the horizon, Aria and Kael walked on their shadows, stretching into one. Each step lengthened the promise so that no matter what tomorrow brought, this sunset would always bear witness to a bond that time could not fade. Somewhere between the wind and the water, the promise still lingered, simple yet eternal. We will always be together. The story of Aria and Kael closes under the Silverpine sunset, not merely as the journey of a blind girl and her courageous German Shepherd, but as a symphony of loyalty, resilience, and unconditional love. Things so seemingly simple, yet powerful enough to change a life. For generations, the German Shepherd has been known for intelligence, courage, and deep devotion. Yet through Kael, we see that their strength lies not only in protection or skill, but in quiet presence, in eyes that listen, in footsteps, always willing to walk alongside. Kael has guided Aria not only along winding lakeside trails, but through life's challenges, offering comfort and trust no words could replace. This story also reminds us of our duty to protect these four-legged partners, especially service dogs, those silent warriors who place human needs before their own. Every act of kindness, every law that shields them, is a promise that we value and honor their service. And in the end, always together is not just Aria and Kael's vow. It is a reminder for us all that love, when nurtured with trust and respect, will cross every boundary and leave a lasting warmth in each step of our lives.